The thing about manipulation is, it never starts loud. It begins with a dinner invitation. Anna called me on a Thursday, said she missed me, said Brian was grilling and the kids wanted to see their grandpa. I told her I'd bring the lemon pie Margaret used to make. There was a pause on the line before she said, "That would be nice." I hadn't seen their dining room in months. It smelled like candles and something too clean, too staged. Anna hugged me tight at the door, but her eyes didn't match the smile. Brian greeted me with a drink in hand. "Glad you made it, old man. Steak's almost done." I didn't like when he called me that. Margaret never let anyone speak to me that way, but I said nothing. Not yet. We sat down at the table. The food was good, but the small talk was brittle. Anna kept glancing at Brian. The kids were upstairs. Halfway through dessert, Brian wiped his hands, reached into his bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "Just a little housekeeping," he said, like he was offering me a pen, not a decision. He slid the envelope across the table. "Just sign it, old man. Keeps everything organized in case something happens, you know." I looked down at the seal. No explanation, no title, just paper. "What is this?" "Nothing serious," he said, waving his hand. "Just transferring some things into Anna's name so we can take care of you better." I don't remember asking to be taken care of. Anna still hadn't said a word. Brian leaned back. "Look, Arthur, I'm not trying to be difficult here, but the last thing anyone wants is for things to get messy if something happens. You've had a stroke. You're slowing down. This is practical." I didn't move. My hand hovered above the envelope. My mind went cold. "If I'm not comfortable signing, I won't sign." Brian chuckled. "You don't want to make this harder than it needs to be." I looked at Anna. "Is this what you brought me here for?" She looked down at her plate. "Brian just wants to make sure things are handled, for your sake." No one asked how I felt, what I wanted. I pushed the envelope back across the table. "If you want me to sign something, send it through a lawyer." Brian's mouth twisted. "You don't need a lawyer, you need clarity." "No," I said quietly, "I need a daughter." The table went silent. I left without finishing dessert. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in my study with Margaret's photo beside me, her handwriting still framed in the corner. "Be steady, not silent." If anyone's listening, don't make the mistake I did. Don't confuse a smile for love or a signature for safety. They thought I was too slow to notice. But I felt the shift. This wasn't about dinner. It was about control. The envelope sat on my desk like a loaded trap. I hadn't touched it since the dinner, hadn't wanted to. But something in Brian's voice haunted me. That smug certainty when he said, "You don't want to make this harder than it needs to be." So I took a breath, slid my letter opener beneath the flap, and unfolded the pages slowly. The first page looked harmless, illegal-sounding nonsense about streamlining estate contingencies. But page two was poison in print. A property transfer, my lakefront house, the one Margaret and I built board by board, reassigned to Anna and Brian. The phrasing was slick, in exchange for ongoing care and supervision. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding. I was still driving, still walking, still thinking clearly. There wasn't a single doctor's note to justify that clause, not one shred of diagnosis that could defend it. They weren't waiting for me to decline. They were engineering the decline. I picked up the phone and called Anna. She answered on the second ring. "Dad, what exactly did you want me to sign, Anna?" She paused. "Brian told you it's just protective, for you, for us. For long-term care support." She hesitated again. "It's just in case something happens. You had the stroke, you're not the same." I swallowed hard. I'm still me, and that house isn't a contingency. It's my home. "Brian's just protecting your interests, Dad. You always overthink these things." Her voice sounded rehearsed, practiced, as if she'd prepared for this exact moment. "Right," I said softly. "Thanks for the clarification." I hung up. That night I went to the hall closet, the one with Margaret's old filing cabinet. I opened the bottom drawer where she kept all the originals, deeds, bank records, her will. There it was, the property deed, folded neatly, marked in her handwriting. I opened it slowly, hands steady now, not shaking. Page 3. Margaret's clause, property shall remain under the sole authority of Arthur Whitmore, not to be altered, sold, or transferred without his expressed and witnessed consent. My chest ached. I remembered her writing that after her second chemo round. I remembered her looking me in the eyes and saying, "If I go first, you keep control. I don't want anyone pushing you out." I took out the version Brian gave me, compared them side by side. The clause was gone, deleted like it never existed. Not overlooked. Erased. I sat down in the dark with both versions in my lap. No music, no TV, just the quiet sound of betrayal unrolling itself on paper. They didn't think I'd notice, didn't think I'd remember. But I had Margaret's words, and her handwriting, and now I had motive. Brian started showing up without calling first. One morning, I opened my door and there he was, holding a paper bag of groceries and smiling like we were old friends. "Just checking in," he said, walking past me before I could answer. He made himself coffee, used my mug, sat in my chair. "You ever think about downsizing?" he asked, glancing around the living room. "Big place for one person, must be hard to manage." I didn't reply. I just watched him scan the shelves like a man taking inventory. That week he came twice more, once with a bottle of multivitamins, the next time with a flyer for a retirement condo. "They've got shuttle service, full-time staff. Might be safer," he said, placing it next to my keys. Anna stopped coming altogether. She texted occasionally, short, clipped messages. "Everything okay?" Or "Brian said you were quiet. Everything good?" They started treating me like a fading photograph. Still there, just not worth keeping in the frame much longer. But I nodded along, smiled when Brian made his veiled comments, let him think I was dimming. Inside, I began documenting. Every text, every drop-in, every time Brian used phrases like "when the time comes" or "you'll thank us later." I logged it in a journal Margaret had gifted me the year before she passed, thick leather, lined pages. She'd written on the inside cover, "For everything you still have to say." And one night after Brian left, I dug out my old answering machine from the closet. Most of the messages were junk, but there was one, still saved, marked with the red flag button. Margaret's voice. "Hey, love. Just a quick thought, if anyone ever tries to use your silence against you, make sure it's the last mistake they make. You've never been weak, just quiet, and that's different." My chest ached, but I didn't cry. I played it again, then again. Her voice steadied me. That night, I installed a voice recorder app on my phone, turned it on when Brian visited, left it running near the hallway when he wandered into my study. "Still keeping all this paper around," he said once, flipping through old folders. "You sure you're up for this kind of upkeep?" I smiled. "Been keeping things in order my whole life." He grunted, kept flipping. I didn't stop him. The audio file saved itself automatically, date stamped, crystal clear. They thought I was fadding, but I was filing. And I wasn't gone. They thought I'd walk into another trap. Anna invited me again. "Brian made reservations this time, no pressure," she said over the phone. Her voice tried to sound light, but it was stiff, stretched like worn thread. I wore the same navy sweater Margaret used to say made me look presidential. It gave me just enough confidence to walk into the fire without blinking. When I arrived at the restaurant, Brian stood up with that salesman grin. Anna was already seated, fidgeting with her napkin. But what caught my eye wasn't the steak menu or the table setting. It was the woman in the navy blazer sitting beside Brian. Black briefcase, clipboard, calm smile. "This is Karen," Brian said smoothly. "She's a notary, just routine, you understand." I blinked once. Routine. "Nothing serious," Karen chimed in. "Just a reaffirmation of intent. We want to make sure everything's in order, your property, your care directives." Anna stared at her glass. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my smile steady. Karen opened her briefcase, pulled out a new stack of documents, thicker this time, a few signature tabs already stuck to the corners. Brian tapped the pen in front of me. "All you need to do is sign at the yellow markers. Shouldn't take more than a minute." I looked down at the pages, then up at Karen. "Actually," I said, reaching into my coat, "before we get to that." I pulled out a sealed manila envelope, quietly slid it across the table. "For you." Karen blinked. "What's this?" "Open it." She did slowly, then frowned. Inside were two crisp sheets, her notary license, pulled from the public registry, and her corporate affiliation, Brian's firm. She looked up, her practiced expression cracking. "I don't understand." "Oh, I think you do," I said, calm, even. "I asked for a notary too. My guy outside. Shall we get everything verified?" Karen looked to Brian. Brian's smile vanished. His face paled. Anna stood abruptly. "Dad, what is this?" I turned to her. "You brought a notary to a dinner. You wanted me to sign away the last thing your mother and I built together. You thought I wouldn't ask questions." Brian pushed the papers aside. "This is unnecessary. You're making it complicated." "No," I said, "I'm making it legal." The waiter arrived, pausing as he sensed the tension. I waved him off gently. Karen closed her briefcase. "I think I should step outside." Brian didn't stop her. Anna sat back down, lips trembling. I reached into my pocket and pressed the voice recorder on my phone, not for them, but for me. The room felt cold, but my chest was warm. They thought they were playing a game. But they'd forgotten I'd already learned the rules. Karen wasn't random, I knew that now. I'd looked her up that night, traced her notary credentials straight back to Brian's firm. The same firm that had drafted my wife's will before Margaret insisted we switch to someone honest. That someone was Helen. Helen had been Margaret's friend for 40 years, and the sharpest attorney I'd ever met. When Margaret died, she was the only person who didn't talk to me like I was fragile. She talked to me like a man who still had choices. I drove to her house the next morning, the lake fog curling low across the road. She met me on her porch with coffee and that same no-nonsense look. "You brought the papers." I nodded, "and a recording." She raised an eyebrow. "Good." At her kitchen table, she spread the documents out like evidence from a crime scene. Her finger landed halfway down the second page. "See this phrase, durable power of attorney in event of cognitive decline." That's the hook. They're not just trying to transfer property, Arthur. They're setting up a legal basis to have you declared unfit. I stared at the words. "Unfit," I repeated softly. "They'd get everything." "Exactly. Bank accounts, house, medical decisions. You'd still be breathing, but you'd be gone on paper." I gripped my coffee mug tighter, the ceramic warm under my hands. "So what do I do?" Helen leaned back. "We don't shout, we document. We file quietly. Every visit, every call, every altered record, keep it. And we'll submit a petition to the probate court contesting their documents before they can act." "Silent petition," I said, recalling the term. She nodded. "No alerts. They'll keep thinking you're confused. That's your advantage." That night I began. I installed cameras in the entryway and study. I backed up every recording to a hard drive. I saved every text from Anna, her gentle guilt trips, her sudden sweetness, and labeled each one by date. I printed Brian's messages too, the ones full of fake concern and veiled threats. "You really shouldn't live alone, Arthur." Helen called daily to check progress. "They're watching you," she said once, "so watch back." So I did. I stopped answering calls, stopped opening the door. When Brian showed up and knocked for 10 straight minutes, I sat in the dark and let the camera capture everything: his impatience, his frustration, his mask slipping. Through the window, I watched him finally mutter something and walk away. Margaret used to say the world underestimates quiet men. She was right. By the end of the week, I had hours of footage, folders of proof, and a petition ready for submission. I didn't feel angry anymore, just focused. They thought they'd buried me under paperwork. But I'd learned to fight with ink too. Brian's version of help came wrapped in cruelty. The caseworker showed up on a Tuesday morning. She was polite, young, dressed in beige, clipboard in hand, voice like she didn't want to be here. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm from Adult Protective Services, just a routine visit." I didn't ask who sent her, I already knew. "Would you like to come in?" I said calmly. She sat in my living room, eyeing the bookshelves, the photo of Margaret on the mantel. We received a concern regarding cognitive decline, potential mismanagement of finances. I nodded, of course. She looked up a little surprised. "Do you mind if I ask a few questions?" I stood, walked slowly to the study, and came back with a leather binder. Labeled, indexed, color-coded tabs. "Here," I said, "start with Section 1, Property Deeds. All in my name. Section 2 is my bank statements. You'll find no unusual withdrawals. Section 3 includes audio logs and transcripts of recent visits from my daughter and her husband." She blinked. "Audio. Legal in this state," I said. "They visit often. I like to keep track of conversations. My memory's still sharp, but paper is sharper." She started flipping through the binder, lips parting slightly as she read. I watched her pause at Brian's words, printed in black and white. "He won't even notice. Just keep being nice until we get the deed signed." Then again at Anna's text. "He's always been stubborn, Dad. We're just trying to help. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I handed her my phone. "That text came last night. I recorded the conversation too, if you'd prefer the tone." She looked at me for a long moment. "You're very organized." My wife was the lawyer. I paid attention. She nodded slowly. "I think I have what I need." When she stood to leave, she hesitated by the door. "If you feel unsafe at any point, Mr. Whitmore." "I'm not unsafe," I said. "I'm aware that's the difference." She left quietly. I watched her car disappear down the street before stepping back inside. That night, I played Margaret's voicemail again. "If anyone ever tries to use your silence against you, make sure it's the last mistake they make." I sat in the dark, the warmth of her voice wrapping around the edges of my resolve. "I hear you, love," I whispered. "They think I'm buried, but I'm still breathing, still watching." I opened a new folder, labeled it APS Report Counterfile. They had their story. But I had the evidence. Helen and I sat across from each other in her office, the sunlight cutting through the blinds in thin, sharp lines. The folder between us was thick: audio logs, transcripts, text messages, legal documents, screenshots. Proof. She looked at me over her glasses. "Are you ready for what happens next?" I nodded. "They wanted silence. I'm giving it to them on paper." We filed the fraud report that afternoon. Civil claim, supporting evidence, official statement, every page carefully timed, every signature precise. "Should we wait until next week?" I asked. Helen shook her head. "No, we serve it the same day they file the guardianship claim. Let the court see both stories at once and decide which one's real." It was almost poetic. Brian and Anna filed their petition just after lunch the following Tuesday, claiming I was non-compliant with care, in cognitive decline, and mismanaging high-value assets. By 2:14 p.m., our counterpetition hit the clerk's desk: fraud, coercion, and elder manipulation, backed with voice recordings, digital timestamps, and notarized statements. The judge called for a preliminary hearing the very next day. I arrived in my best suit, cane polished, not for show but for steadiness. Helen walked beside me, calm as a quiet tide. Brian sat across the aisle, pale, jaw tight. Anna was beside him, her hands clenched in her lap. She didn't look at me. The clerk read the docket aloud. 2 motions, 2 narratives. The judge leaned back and looked directly at Brian. These filings are in direct conflict. Before I consider guardianship, I'll be reviewing the fraud allegations, including submitted recordings. Do you have any response to those, Mr. Whitmore? Brian opened his mouth, then closed it. Anna stared straight ahead, blinking too fast. I didn't say a word. I just folded my hands and waited. They tried to strip me of dignity by using my silence against me. But silence, used right, is sharper than any voice. Every whisper they made, every smile masking a plan, I documented it. Now the silence was mine to wield. The judge tapped the folder Helen had handed him. This hearing is adjourned until review is complete. All asset transfers are frozen until further notice. We stood slowly. Brian muttered something under his breath. Anna finally turned her head just enough to glance at me, not with anger, with shame. I met her eyes just for a second. Then I walked past without stopping. Outside, the air felt clearer, lighter. I didn't smile, I didn't celebrate. I just tightened my grip on the cane and walked forward. They weren't going to bury me quietly. Not without digging up everything they tried to hide. The courtroom smelled like paper and polished wood, clean, formal, sterile. But underneath it reeked of betrayal. Helen stood at the front, calm and precise. She spoke like she was laying out the weather, nothing dramatic, just facts. These audio recordings, she began, include conversations in which the respondents refer to manipulating Mr. Whitmore, using phrases like, "He won't even notice," and "keep being nice until he signs." The judge nodded, not looking up yet. She continued, "We've included side-by-side comparisons of the original property deed and the modified version presented to Mr. Whitmore, where a protective clause written by his late wife was removed without legal cause or witness." I didn't flinch. I'd read those comparisons a dozen times. "Furthermore," Helen said, lifting a folder, "you'll find photographs of Mr. Brian Thatcher accessing Mr. Whitmore's home office without permission. We've timestamped security footage of him opening private files." Brian shifted in his seat. "And finally, we've included expense records, charges made using Mr. Whitmore's checking account under the guise of vacation planning, though Mr. Whitmore was never invited on these trips." I looked across the room. Anna stared down at her lap. Her knuckles were white. Helen turned to the bailiff. "May I play one more audio file?" The judge nodded. A speaker clicked, then Margaret's voice filled the room, soft and certain. "If anyone tries to use your silence against you, make sure it's the last mistake they make. You've never been weak, just quiet, and that's different." The courtroom went still. Anna lifted her head, her eyes glassed over. Brian leaned forward. "This is character assassination. None of that proves intent." The judge raised a hand. "You'll wait your turn, Mr. Thatcher." Silence again. Then the judge looked at me. "Mr. Whitmore, would you like to say anything?" I rose slowly, one hand on the cane they once mocked, the one Brian joked I'd soon be buried with. I took a moment, looked at Anna, then at Brian. "You said, 'Just sign it, old man,'" I said, voice steady. "But the thing about old men, we remember everything." I let it hang there, no need to raise my voice. "We remember how our wives wrote our names beside theirs in ink. We remember what dignity sounds like. And we remember who tries to take it away." The courtroom didn't move. Not a cough, not a shuffle. Just the sound of the judge turning the final page in our file. I sat back down. and waited. The judge's voice was flat and final. The court rules in favor of Mr. Whitmore. The documents submitted by Mr. Brian Thatcher and Ms. Anna Whitmore are invalidated due to evidence of coercion and forgery. The guardianship petition is dismissed. All property rights are restored to Mr. Whitmore effective immediately. I didn't blink. I didn't move. I just kept my hands folded in my lap, the edge of my cane resting lightly against my boot. Mr. Thatcher, the judge continued, you are referred to the district attorney's office for investigation. Ms. Whitmore, you are hereby removed from any legal access to your father's estate and financial accounts. This ruling is final. Across the aisle, Brian's face had gone paper white. His lips moved like he was searching for air. Anna's mascara had started to smudge. She didn't cry in big, dramatic sobs. It was quieter, the kind of crying that comes when you realize you were never the victim. They didn't look at me at first. But as the clerk began collecting papers and people began standing, Brian finally turned his head. Arthur, he said, just once weakly. I stood without answering, steady. No trembling in the knees, no shaking in the hand, just stillness as sharp as steel. Anna looked up, eyes red and wide. Dad, she whispered. I walked past them, past the bench where they'd spent the past hour watching their version of control turn to ash, past the aisle where they tried to bury me with a signature. I didn't stop. Some justices loud, gavel slams, angry outbursts, applause. But this was something else. Clean, precise, sharp as a scalpel. Outside, the sun had risen just enough to warm the courthouse steps. I found a bench off to the side, half shaded, half sunlit, sat down slow, let my cane rest gently against my knee. I closed my eyes. For a long time, I just breathed. I could feel Margaret in that sunlight, not a ghost, just the warmth of everything she stood for, everything we built, everything they tried to rewrite without me. I didn't feel proud or victorious. I just felt intact. Brian had tried to erase me. Anna had tried to repurpose me. But the law had listened. And Margaret's voice, her words stitched through memory and voicemail, had guided every step. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the photo I carried of her, folded gently in wax paper. I looked at her smile, then let it sit on the bench beside me. Together again under the sun. No judge, no paper, no false smile could ever take that from me. The house has been quiet lately, but it doesn't feel empty, not anymore. This morning I hung 2 frames above my desk. On the left, a photo of Margaret taken on a fall afternoon when the light made her hair look like it was spun from fire. She's laughing, eyes half closed, holding a teacup in both hands. It's the way I still see her, warm, unshakable. And beside her in the second frame, the original deed. My name, her name, the clause she wrote in her own hand, the one they tried to erase, preserved, stamped, untouched. The house is mine again, but not just in legal terms, in spirit. Every floorboard I built with my hands, every window she cleaned until it sparkled, every night we sat on the porch and watched the lake go still, they're all safe now. They tried to take it from me with a signature. Instead, I gave it a second life. A week ago, I met with Helen and signed the final transfer, not to family, but to a trust, one that donates annually to legal aid for elder fraud victims. Quiet help for the quiet ones, the ones who don't know how to raise their voice until it's too late. Anna sent a letter after the hearing, handwritten, pages long, full of apologies, regret, half-formed justifications. We didn't mean to go that far. Brian was scared. We thought you were slipping. I read it once, then I placed it back in the envelope. I didn't write back. Instead, I sent her a copy of the court judgment. No note, just the ruling, clean and final. At the bottom, in my own handwriting, I added one line. You had me sign nothing. I signed you out of my future. It's not vengeance. It's boundary, a wall that should have existed years ago. Margaret would have understood. She always said, family isn't blood, it's behavior. I sit at my desk now, pen resting in my hand. The sun has begun to drift through the blinds, casting slow golden lines across the wood. It catches on something silver, the wedding ring Margaret used to wear, now strung on a chain around my neck. I reach up, feel the weight of it against my chest, still warm. They thought they'd written the final chapter of my life, with forged lines and gentle lies. But in the end, the only thing I signed was survival.